want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's a nice crowd in attendance. We have some simple goals for the evening. It's to learn more about how to merger vote, it's to listen to one another, and have a healthy civic exchange of ideas. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. A little bit about the structure of the evening. We thought we would end at 8 o'clock. That makes for a 2-hour conversation. We also have another evening scheduled on the 27th of October. So if there's any lingering details that we didn't quite get to tonight, we can push those into October 27th. In a minute here, I'm going to do some introductions, and then we'll have a presentation, and then time for questions and answers. But I'll start with introductions. I think I first want to start with our school board here. 4 out of the 5 of us are in attendance. Stacy Simanowicz will arrive shortly, we hope, I think. Well, I'm going to start with Meg. So Meg, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Meg's here, and I'm on the merger committee, and I'm really interested in hearing what folks have to say and having a good discussion.
Hi, I'm Edmund Booth, and I'm on the school board.
I am Deanna Bailey, school board member, long-term educator.
Brett, I wonder if we should invite Michael Marks and John Albertini to sit up here as well.
Wherever they want to be is.
Have you go up?
Sure.
That's fine. Thank you, Miss.
Another person, 2 people to introduce here. One would be.
Here we are.
Michael Marks, who would chair the volunteer planning merger committee, as well as John Albertini, who's the superintendent of Chittenden East. Quick show of hands. There was others. I think there are others in the audience who are actually on the volunteer merger planning committee. So show of hands if you are on that committee, just to give others in the audience a sense of who's here. Thanks for coming tonight. After Michael gives his presentation, which I gather is about 20 minutes or so,
Try and keep it to that, maybe go shorter.
we'll have plenty of time for questions. We thought we might initially ask people to keep their questions or their comments to 3 minutes, just to make sure that everyone has time to speak. And then if we've gone through everyone who wants to speak or ask some questions, and there's additional time, then we can circle back and people can have the floor for a little bit longer. Sound like a good plan? Great. All right. Well, then, Michael, I'll thank you.
Thank you very much, Brett. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the Voluntary Merger Committee, and I have a presentation I'd like to make, and I'm also looking forward to questions and dialogue. And if there's anything that we don't reach in the time allotted, I'd be happy to stay and talk with anybody who would like to have some more conversation or at another point in time. And we also have these presentations planned throughout the district, so there will be other opportunities for that. So I'd like to start with just a description of what our school system and our school community really is today. As you see there, the Chittenden East Supervisory Union is comprised of 5 different towns: Underhill, Jericho, Bolton, Richmond, and Huntington, and 6 elementary school districts. There's a district called the Underhill ID Independent District that's carved out of portions of Jericho and Underhill. And of course, we have one union school district, the Mount Mansfield Union School District. It's been in existence for about 50 years, and it educates all of our children in grades 5 through 12. But because we have these 6 independent elementary school districts, we have a governance structure that has 8 separate boards. So we have a total of 45 school board members for the 6 different elementary school boards and the MMU school board. We have another 21 appointed members to the Chittenden East Supervisory Union. And because all these boards are legally distinct entities, Each of them makes their own decisions on a variety of issues. Each of them critically prepares their own budget. And all that somehow is supposed to come together into a cohesive school system. So we have 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 high school, but all of that is governed through these 8 separate boards. Now, our community, and by our community I mean that this entire map here, has about 15,000 residents in it. And we serve about 2,500 students at this point in time. And this actually is probably what prompts this whole discussion tonight. This is something you would have found on the website even before we started this conversation. That's the organizational chart for how we govern our schools. And forgive me for its complexity, but this is exactly as it's been presented for years, because it is complex. We have those 6 different voting elementary districts. They each are electing their own school board. They're separately electing the Mount Mansfield School Board. They're separately this appointed Chip Committee Supervisory Union. And all of this somehow is supposed to blend into a superintendent of schools who's responsible for the administration of all the schools, and then flow down through our principals, to our teachers and support staff, and finally our students. The concern, I think, that motivated this primarily was, is this a model that effectively serves students and taxpayers and really works for our community? This is what's being proposed. And it's very easy to say. We would have votes in each of our communities. In fact, the Underhill ID district would disappear on this, so we don't need for it. It's only a special school district. So we have 5 separate communities. They elect a single board, which would have 15 members. They'd be elected on a proportional basis, just like we do the MMU board. They, in turn, would set policy and work with the administration to the superintendent. In turn, work with principals and teachers and schools. So the goal of this is to streamline the governance in our community to a single manageable institution. And you may have heard that there are possibilities that this could either be a unified school district in the next chart or a modified. If everybody votes yes, then we'll have a unified union school district with the last chart that I described. But if 1 or 2 of our communities vote no, then we have what's called modified. Those 2 districts would still retain their elementary school boards, and they would still govern their elementary school boards decisions. However, the remainder of the decisions for the supervisory union and for the modified union, they would all be made at that single board where all of us would have proportional representation. Now, these are the committee members who served on this. And you can see, of course, your members from Huntington were Harry, Megs, and Brett. There have been some questions raised and assertions that this is just a recycled committee from the old R&D study. The fact is that only 7 of these 18 people served in the last R&D committee. And this is a question in terms of our governance, though, as I just mentioned, it goes back to the R&D study. If you go back to 2010, there was a detailed study prepared by David Ford from the Vermont School Boards Association, former principal and superintendent in Vermont, who's done a lot of this work. And then there was a voluntary merger planning process. And that was a very public process. There were 12 public meetings, there were 7 community forums, and it culminated in a vote on June 2nd, 2001. Now that vote, there was a majority who supported merging in all of our districts, but it was a very narrow majority. I think it was a margin of about 17 votes. 4 of our school districts voted yes, 2 of them voted no. And as a consequence, under the law that then existed, no majority of the voters had approved and the majority of the districts had voted for it, it was defeated. Now the legislature has changed the law since then, and the law now allows a process whereby if at least 4 of our school districts vote yes, then there will be a modified union. And that led to the process that we have now, and it started in November of 2013. And we went through a very long public and study process. I mean, if you would like to see just some of the materials we looked at, just look at our website. There is a wealth of data there that we looked at and debated and considered. We had 15 public meetings. There was public comment in every one of them. Included in those public meetings before we approved our recommendation was an open public forum where we took comments, engaged in conversation with people for as long as it took. And this culminated in a recommendation by the Secretary of Education, the State Board of Education, and they approved our plan on August 19th of 2014. And now the public process, or as my wife likes to think, the public marathon is continuing. This is our fourth public meeting out of 14 that we've scheduled throughout our district, with the vote occurring on November 4th, 2014 by Australian ballot as part of the general election. So let me now, I've laid the background and talk about what is the reasoning behind what the Voluntary Merger Committee is recommending. And we really divided this into three distinct areas. Would this governance reform benefit students? Would it benefit taxpayers? Would it be good for our communities? And we came to the conclusion that this was something that would benefit our students. And at the top of the list, of course, is pre-K unified education decisions. If you think about it, educating students requires a school system that can look at what's happening in the 8th grade and make changes in what's happening in the 2nd grade. It can learn from the experience in 11th grade and apply it in 3rd grade. It can use a 1st grade curriculum to prepare students for a 12th grade. Now, I know you've heard from many people say, wait a second, that's why we have a supervisory committee. But the problem with that is the supervisory committee has no authority over the budget, none whatsoever. And in today's modern education, the hard decisions that need to be made to really integrate education from kindergarten or pre-kindergarten really through 12 have to do with resources. How do you train your teachers? What are the curriculum materials that are provided to the students? Those are the kind of hard decisions you have to make. And those are the hard decisions that we think we're in a better position to make with the structure. Second on our list is equality. Now, one of the things that Vermont tries to pride itself on is giving every student an equal opportunity to a full education. The reality is, if you look among our 6 elementary schools, that's no longer occurring. There are disparities in the things we provide, such as technology, training of teachers, facilities, even time and very specific programs. Now, why has that evolved? It's evolved because over the last 7 years, there's been a continuous pressure on elementary school budgets, particularly small school budgets, that has been caused by declining enrollments and a state tax system that basically says if you lose students, your average spending, and therefore your taxes are going up, even if you're a small school, and you don't have the option of laying off the 1st grade teacher because you've lost 3 students, because you still have to have a 1st grade, you still go up. And what that does is that confronts school boards with the problem of saying, well, how do we make this work? The only way they can make that work is by trimming programs. That's a phenomenon we're seeing increasingly in our district. And it's driven by the fact that these elementary schools, these small elementary schools, have their budgets calibrated on their own individual basis, rather than as part of our larger community. We also think it's just a matter of organizational efficiency. If we have one budget, then we can talk about our priorities. We can say, well, what can we really afford and how can we do it best? And that's a way to focus in on what students need and use those resources widely. So instead of having 8 separate silos that discreetly decide what's best for students, we look at it on a consolidated basis and do all of our priorities together. We've also looked at the impact this would have because of the allocation of time for our administrators. Now, I've heard some people say, gee, this is all about taking your administrators out of meetings. Nothing could be further from the truth. What this is about is putting our administrators in a position where they can be educational leaders, where they can focus on what it is that really matters to students, as opposed to spending their time trying to align decisions among 8 different boards with 66 members. We also think it would benefit students if we're in a position to share staff. Now, I know the argument's been raised, gee, Chittenden East, you share some staff people today. It's very few. John, I think the number's 7, isn't it? Out of our whole, and even those folks, even those 7 folks are shared with great restrictions because basically they are doing work for separate legal entities. We think that if we have this kind of system, we can move and adapt staff to meet the needs of students, regardless of where they live throughout NMU. There's also the question of innovation. It's so hard to innovate the school system. You really have to get buy-in from 8 separate boards. Now, I'm not saying that tomorrow we're going to be able to magically create the perfect innovation. But when you think about it, when you have to get that many people on the same page, it's awfully hard to do innovation. And a lot of the things that we might even have conversations on just die on the mind. For example, suppose we wanted to talk about whether our students would be better off if middle school started in 6th grade as opposed to 5th grade. I mean, there's a lot of argument out there for the proposition that those students are too immature for middle school. We can't even have that conversation. So in a nutshell, we came to the conclusion that students would benefit if we had one system that was focused on the continuous progress of students from the time they entered to the time they left, and was constantly applying the lessons throughout the years they're in school to how we teach them throughout their time in school. And I put this in here just because I've always thought very highly of Paul Corvallis, who was the principal of Browns River for so long. He was one of the founding administrators of this district. And it just captured so much our thinking as a committee. I thought it was worthwhile for people to see it. He said, I often use the analogy of shipping vessels when comparing school district configurations. I compare the present configuration to an ocean freighter, difficult to navigate, very resistant to movement and change. Also, the freighter takes enormous energy to change course and direction. As I understand the proposed model, I would compare it to a frigate, which is known for its speed and versatility. I believe this is the appropriate model for the future of education in Chittenden East. And we know not all school administrators have the same viewpoint, and some very good ones who have served us very well disagree with this. But I think it is fair to say that if you talk with the school administrators who have experience here, that there is a significant majority of them who think this is a good idea for us and our students. So now I want to start transitioning to the financial side of this, because it's not just about students, it's about taxpayers as well. This is just to lay out the basic dimensions of what we're talking about. We manage and spend a lot of money. We have over $43 billion in our current budget, and you can see that broken down. The vast majority of it is spent at the MNU level. The second largest chunk is budgeted at the Chittenden East Supervisor Union level. And then we have each of the individual elementary schools. And if you'll notice, with the smaller budgets, they tend to correlate to school population. And just as a basic observation, when you're managing a smaller amount of money, there's less flexibility and ability to deal with the kind of problems you confront. So this is why we came to the conclusion that we can do better for taxpayers with merged governance structure. Simply the fact that we have one budget versus 8, not only does that change the expense of preparing them, I don't even imply it's going to be 1/8 of the expense. We still have to look at what the cost would be in each building. But our business administrator has said there is a significant savings associated with that. But more important, it allows you to move resources back and forth where they're needed and share them where you can obtain efficiencies. We think there's real savings with the time and effort that are required to align decisions. So our senior people, our superintendent, business manager, we're expecting them to devote their time to, in large part, manage our dollars efficiently. Well, if they're spending too many hours of their day simply aligning decisions of adult school board members, they can't focus on that task. I've already talked about sharing of resources, but there's also peculiarities in the state taxing system, which really are worth thinking about. The state taxing system, as you get a small elementary school and you lose enrollment, you end up being penalized. In fact, we have one of our communities that's already been spending and has an excess spending penalty. It's not because the board members are profitable, it's just because they don't have enough students and they can't fire any more staff without jeopardizing a basic level of education. Small districts are hurt badly in the state system. And we, at this point, have 2 of our local elementary districts. The board chairs are here, they can talk to you about this. They're in serious trouble because of it. And if we were on a consolidated basis, we would all be blended together and they wouldn't face those penalties. We also have identified in our report savings that we believe we can achieve. Now, I think it's important to talk about that. I've heard people say, gee, you only identified $300,000 worth of savings. We have a $43 million budget, that's less than 1%. My response back is, anytime you can save $300,000, that's well worth doing. But secondly, if you read our report carefully, we noted that these were the savings we thought we could quantify. How does one quantify the money that you can save because your superintendent is now available to work on funding issues and saving money? How do you quantify all these other efficiencies I described? You can't quantify them. They are real. The only way you can achieve them, of course, is to go through this process. And we've also talked about tax rate stability. One of the problems in our current system is that small municipalities, they can fluctuate like this in their taxes, depending on if they get some more kids who moved in, or some who moved out. And that's a real challenge for many of our small schools. And finally, we did talk about the state tax incentives. Now, I've heard people say the only reason you're proposing this is you'd like to get those state tax incentives. The state tax incentives are, they will reduce our property taxes by 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents, and 2 cents over a 4-year period. It sounds true. We would be recommending this if we thought that was all we were going to get on the financial side. By the same token, we don't want to ignore the fact that this is a valuable benefit for taxpayers who are pressed at this time. Now, we've done an estimate of the impact of this, and this is a hard estimate to do because we don't have budget figures for next year. The state hasn't even issued its preliminary tax figures for next year. They won't do that until December 1st. And so we don't have a projected budget for next year, or nobody could. So we worked off of last year's budget. And if you look at that, those are the figures at the bottom that are based on that calculation that folks would save for $100,000 of house site. And as you can see, Huntington, it would be $50 per 100,000. Now, I want to emphasize to you that once we actually get into the next budget cycle, we'll have harder numbers. And in all likelihood, if this top line for FY16 is going up, then this line is going to show a full 5% across the board. Because the reason it shows this is the state has built in the tax savings here. Once this top line goes up with the calculation for FY16, it would flow through there. But I don't have the numbers for that yet. Nobody will until we go through that process. And we conclude as a committee that this was a valuable benefit that really we should make available to our taxpayers and our communities. And then we got to the last question, maybe in some respects the hardest question. Will we be a better community if we take this path? And I know I've heard lots of people say, we're going to be losing our town control. We're going to be losing our town school members. We're not going to be a community anymore. And when I thought about that, when we talked about as a committee, we reached a conclusion. First of all, one of the features of our governance structure that we're proposing is an accountable governance. When you have a melange of 8 separate boards with all of this interacting and confusing authority, awfully hard to have accountability in government. But secondly, and perhaps more important, we talk about what really is our community. Our community doesn't stop at town lines. And for 50 years, our community, I think, has been defined by our mutual commitment to Mount Mansfield. Our children have gone there, most of our tax dollars have gone there, and every kid from grade 5 through 12 is there today as we speak. And it is a community. It's not as if you see Mount Mansfield school board members say, gee, my town needs this, and somebody say, no, my town needs that. And it's not as if when the children are at school that anybody's saying, well, you're from home, or you're from Richmond, or treat you differently. We've acted as a simple community. And so what we think is that we ought to look at this as an opportunity to embrace that community, not to talk about the artificial divisions that exist, talk about how we are truly better together. That if we have a single board elected by everyone, one board member for every 1,000 residents, which is not exactly a high ratio, each community having a representation, that we have the sense that our community will be together for education. We'd all be in it, and it's all with our neighbors. We've always worked well together. So this is it. The decision we have to make is, do we want to continue to live with this? Or would we rather move to a system where those boards have disappeared and we have the same representation and governance model that we have for MMU, for all of our schools, for all of our communities? Now, final thoughts for you. This is, obviously everybody's got to make their own choice, but I think it is valuable to think about what level of support this is received. It was approved by our committee by a vote of 14-1. It was supported by a vote of several school boards: Jericho, Richmond, Underhill ID, Bolton, and Mount Mansfield. To date, no school board has opposed this. And the Underhill Center School Board has not taken an official position on it, although I understood in the last meeting that a majority of the members said they intended to vote for it. They didn't want to take an official position as a board. And the Huntington School Board has not taken a position on it. I think that's something that we ought to consider, whether that kind of support from all of these school board members on the front lines really says something about whether this is a good idea for us to at least consider. So that's my presentation. Appreciate your patience with me, and happy to turn it back to you, Brad, for the conversation and try to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Well, I think we're at the point where we can take questions. If there's a question, Michael, I'd like to give you first shot at answering the question. Or if there's comment, we'll just hear the comment and then move on to the next person who wants to speak. Who would like to go first? I don't know everyone's name, so gentlemen, please. And then Heather, you can go next.
Thank you, Paul Susan, live on Dean Road. You may have seen my post in Huntington Forum. I think we're talking about money, we're talking about education, we're talking about control. I know we have 3 minutes. Let me just do it this way. How many members of the local school board now in Huntington? 5. There's about 1,200 people in town. About 240 per board member. As opposed to the proposal, 15 board members, 15,000 people, 1,000 per. So I'm concerned about that. Quality of education, I'd love to hear from local teachers at this school. That's really critical. I was an administrator all my life, I was a teacher all my life. I understand all of the administrative reasons for doing this, and I think there are several that are legitimate. But unless the teachers come out in Huntington, in numbers, and say to us, this is important for our kids, then I'm going to have serious concerns about it. My third point is this, and this is the one I made in the post. Huntington enrollments have gone up over the last 6 years, since 08, 09. They've gone up. Bolton, way down. Richmond, way down. Why would Huntington support this unless Huntington fully understands that what they're doing is they're supporting the sister towns? They're supporting Bolton, they're supporting Richmond, they're supporting Jericho, etc. Why would they do that? Because what has happened here has been good news. Enrollment's up, per pupil spending, the lowest of all of the towns. Doesn't even compare to Bolton. I think the most salient slide for finances was the one where you list the towns, you list the enrollment, and you list the budget. And just quick numbers there. Any of us can run those numbers. You can see where Huntington is situated in terms of enrollment, and you can see where Huntington is situated in terms of budget. And they're in a really, really good place. So right now, as of this moment, subject to change over the next couple of weeks, I vote no, because I don't have answers to those questions. Thank you.
Just very briefly. One thing I would ask you to consider is whether it's fair for teachers on the spot and say, you've got one way or another, a hard and controversial question. Now, I talked privately, and John has as well, with lots of teachers who expressed support for this, and also expressed concern that they still need to be able to educate students, even though it's a hot question. Now, in terms of Huntington coming out ahead, I look at it this way. All of those children are ours. They all show up in our school system at grade 5. It's not as if we can look at them as someone else's. And it's not as if we can say in any one of our towns that 3, 4, 5 years from now, we won't face the same problems.
Debbie?
Well, my question is the first part of the call question regarding the size of the proposed new school board and the responsibility that that board will have now from pre-K through grade 12. And I really cannot comprehend a board of the same size that currently oversees the middle schools and the high school, assuming the responsibility for the pre-K through the 4th grades for the entire schools in the district. How is that going to happen? How can the people, that number of people, assume that responsibility, that in-depth knowledge, such a broad range of educational needs? It's incomprehensible to me. So I'd like to hear how that would be achieved and what the burden on those board members would be.
I've served on the MMU board for 7 years now. I think it is fair to say that it is a good, strong, functioning board. It has to already deal with a wide range of responsibilities. The ability of that board to think about education on a continuous basis, as opposed to simply having an island of a segment of education, is such an enormous benefit that I'm convinced that they can manage that workload, but more importantly, use that benefit for everybody. Let me give you a quick example. At our last board meeting, we discussed our latest scores on science and the NECAP standardized test. Good news, we're one of the top schools in the state. Bad news, only 50% proficient. The terrible news, who's losing out? Kids of low income. Those are the students who we really have to strive to reach. Now, in a unified system, we can do something that we did at the MMU level seamlessly. When those results came in, what our administrators did and what our teachers did is they looked, how are our kids failing? Not just what the raw score is, but what subject matter are they missing? What types of questions are they missing? How do we change the curriculum? How do we change how they're taught? And that information flows seamlessly from the 11th grade test down to the 8th grade test in a different school, down to how 5th and 6th graders are prepared. It doesn't flow seamlessly down to the elementary schools because those kinds of decisions require money. Now, a good functioning school board does not get into the nuts and bolts of saying, what are the questions you're going to ask on your exam? But a good functioning school board says to administration, we need to hold you accountable to bring that all together. And I think on balance, if you look at this, we can do this, and we have that opportunity that we don't have in the current system.
Yeah, I have other questions about the big board. In the post-unified world, currently we have the 30 members, volunteer members of the elementary schools, 5 from each local district, and they sit on district committees, policy, curriculum, transportation, personnel, and they make the policy, they report back to their local boards, and for anyone who's interested, they can go to the board meetings in their own town and listen to what is being talked about at the district level in those committees, and that informs the decision of the district. What is going to happen when we lose those 30 volunteers? Who is going to, who's going to sit on those committees? That's my first question. And my second question is, the other thing that I think is very important at school board meetings currently is the interaction between the local board and the principal of the school. And that is that our board makes decisions, big decisions. It may be only 20% of our budget, but I think it has a bigger effect than 20% based on what the principal tells them is happening and what things would work. And so how, I know that you're not expecting 8 principals to show up at these new board meetings, or maybe you are, but when does that questioning happen? When does the interaction between principal and board happen? Now it's, between half an hour and an hour per meeting. So where is that going to be achieved?
Well, let me answer both of the questions. In terms of the committee volunteers, we right now in Mount Mansfield have a strong committee structure. And so the way it works right now is that we have divided the various areas that we talked about into separate committees. And those committees meet separately. They hold public meetings. They invite comments. We have student members on our committee who do a great job and make a wonderful contribution. So I don't envision that being different.
So there will just be fewer members on each one of those committees?
Not necessarily. It depends on the particular committee, its workload, whether they need to bring in public volunteers for a particular committee. Not necessarily. In terms of your other question about principals, our principals don't come to every one of our meetings, but they do come to our meetings, and we regularly interact with the principals of MMU, Camels Hump, Browns River. I don't think that will be any different in a modified structure.
Michael, just to clarify, you're saying that that those committees are made up not strictly of the 15 members. They're not strictly pulled from the 15 members that are on the amendment board. They're pulled from the community, they're pulled from the student body, they're brought in to special classes.
Our standing committees do have student members. Our ad hoc committees at times bring in members of the public. And one of the examples that I've heard is in our discussion is hiring of administrators. Our standard practice in Mount Mansfield is when there's a vacancy in either Camels Hump or Browns River, and remember those schools only serve parts of MMU, that we bring in parents and teachers and volunteers to have a screening process. And so that's the kind of model that I'm envisioning for the future. I don't see the argument, and others may disagree, but I don't see the argument for the proposition that MMU's history leads one to think that it wants to shut out the community. MMU is part of this community. It is this community.
I think it's a question of logistics. Is that what your point is?
Yeah, we're losing 30 people who currently do work for the district without being paid.
And you're talking about your 6 elementary schools and 6 principals, and now there's gonna be 9 schools and 1 school board.
Yeah, so, I mean, if your solution is that we get 5 volunteers from the community to do the district committee work, then that's fine. Now, then we are replacing our current local board members with community members. That would be totally understandable, but to think that the 15 members of the new board are taking on, or, you know, I just see either the committees having fewer people on them or being, you know, absorbed into central office or something. I just didn't understand what was going to happen and how we would hear back, because that transportation committee deals with pre-K through 12 transportation. So we get to hear, I mean, there's a phenomenal amount of cross-district. I know what time is it.
Great question. I do want to move along. I saw Dave, yes, Dave's hand up, and then Ken, and then we'll come back over to Helen.
My name is Dave Clark. I'm on the interview board, have been this is my 13th year. And been on the finance committee and several other committees, curriculum. My major concern is losing all of those members from the individual elementary boards. Those inputs, those avenues for members of the public to talk to them, ask them questions, making a connection with someone. So you're going from 45 to 50. And as a result of that, the likelihood is that fewer people are going to know someone on that board. So fewer people are going to have, more people are going to, you know, maybe not feel as comfortable in terms of asking questions, getting information, and sort of providing a conduit into the education system. The other issue for me is, I worked for the state for 35 years, and I was in a department that was consolidated into another department, the two of them together. And the idea being that the overall governance was going to provide better services for the client base. And that happened about 7 years ago, and the results have been that it's no better, and in some cases it's worse. Creating a larger structure. And in our case, you're going to have a board that's more distant from the individual schools and more distant from the public. And those are my major concerns about doing this, that we're not necessarily providing the best ways for the public to interact. I don't disagree with all aspects of the merger. I mean, I have other concerns about, all towns and sharing the collective amount of monies that are owed through bonds and whatever by all towns. That there's some inequality there. We're talking about creating equality, but then there's inequality because there's disparate amounts of money that each town may owe. So that's all I want to respond.
Yeah, I just want to, Dave, thanks for the comments. We of course have lots of conversations together, but I do want to respond to your last point. I've heard people say we should disapprove this because Richmond has twice as much debt as other towns or some other one. It's kind of like saying if I have a $150,000 house with a $50,000 mortgage on it, and you've got a $450,000 house with a $100,000 mortgage, you're twice as bad off as that. Well, what you have to look at, what we have looked at, is not just the debts of the various communities, but their assets. The good news is that all of our communities have positive assets. And then also, the good news for those who are hoping for equality is that if you look at Richmond, Huntington, Jericho, the UID, and the UCS, they have remarkably similar ratios of assets to debts, especially on per resident basis. The only community that really would be contributing more on a per resident basis, noticeably than the others, is Bolton. And in fact, Huntington has the second lowest contribution on that basis to be made. So I think perhaps more important is thinking about why we're doing this. And one of the problems we face on a going forward basis is, are small schools going to be able to meet their capital needs? Right now, our small schools each has a capital budget. They're all supposed to have reserve funds. None of them have a reserve. And it's pretty obvious why. They're too small to fit that into their budgeting requirement. This is one of these examples where if the community, as a community, can be pulled together, we can do something that individually we can. I think it will be equal and fair for the participants.
Let's move on, Ken, and then Helen, and Heidi, I see your hand.
Thank you, Brett. My name is Ken Remsen. I am the one school board member from Bolton on the NNU board, so I understand some of the discussion pretty well. I would also point out that over the last 20 years, the leadership of Chittenden executive board has come from either Bolton or Underhill ID the majority of the time, it's the two smallest schools in the district. So I think they've had their voices heard. I've also spent a lot of time in education. I worked 25 years in public schools in 3 different systems. And for the last 9+ years, I've worked in Vermont at the Agency of Education, visiting schools and districts from one end of the state to the other, and one side to the other. So I've seen a lot of schools. In my work time in public education, I worked in 3 systems that were similar. They all had multiple elementary schools, they all had 1 or 2 middle schools, and they all had 1 high school. One was a small city system, the other 2 were rural systems that served multiple communities. One of those systems had 5 school board members, one had 15, and one had over 40. The classroom teacher, the gentleman over here spoke about classroom teachers. My experience is teachers don't want to get involved. They're too busy doing the best they can with their kids. They don't have time for this. They really don't even notice if there's 5, 15, or 50 school board members on a day-to-day basis. They don't even notice that. They will do their job and they will do it well. As far as accountability, I think that we need to think about that a little bit. Again, based on my travels all over and my work in systems, accountability is a big one for me. I think it's very difficult for a superintendent to monitor 45 or 50 school board members and be an educational leader. They can be a glorified bookkeeper and they can be a politician, but I don't think they can be an educational leader because there's not enough time. I've spoken to superintendents around the country, and when I tell them what the structure is here, I have one, the most common response I get is, I couldn't do my job if I had to serve that many school board members. I don't have time for that. It takes me enough time if I have 5 board members to educate them on the educational leadership and things that I'm working on. So I think that's another area that we need to think about. Finally, one of my roles on the Mount Mansfield board is on the finance committee. And Michael just spoke to it about assets and liabilities. I hope that if Huntington votes to go their own way, when you have to put in a new heating system or do major work on this school, you're glad you're doing it yourself and not sharing it with everybody else. Thank you.
Helen. Well, just a point of order with Helen, and then Heidi, and Becca, and then Gail.
I have 5 or 6 points, and I'm just going to just state. The first one is in reaction to something that was said here, which is people here, Helen. Okay. Just in reaction to one of the statements that was just recently made about what would it look like with the new board and the committees that are there now, that are from the boards and the communities. And I think the point really is, to me, the way I get that part is that it's up to the new board. The new board is going to pretty much define how everything is done. So if that's not correct, then let me know, but I mean, using examples of how it might work is okay, but there's no guarantee that the new board will be seeking input probably on that and then implementing their own procedures. That's my thought. I'm concerned about the rush. After the defeat the last time, it just feels that we should have been spending some time doing consensus building. And I feel that the time and the energy that the voluntary merger committee put into was the development of the template. And a rush to make sure that it was to the state board and passed in time to have a quick, well, the first election we could possibly have. And as some of you know, I would have much preferred to do the planning, consensus building and planning prior to doing the template, but that didn't happen. And I don't want to get stuck on that, but I do want to say that. The ballot is way too confusing. I feel like there should be a t-shirt or something that says, if it's too confusing, don't vote for it. You know, because you really do need to understand it, because a vote no is kind of a vote yes in another way. So because of the modified aspect of this, so it is, I don't know, did the Secretary of State actually review the wording?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Like a quick answer, I don't like the ballot wording either, but it's really mandated by law.
Well, that wording isn't mandated by law, but it is expected.
No, the wording is mandated by law. We literally
Really?
had to hire an attorney, and there are, of course, this is not my legal
Right,
statute.
it's the legislative.
Yeah, there are just a ream of statutes that say it has to say this, it has to say that. I'm as frustrated as you are by that one. But
Well, anyways, you
that's the
need to
reality.
know about that a vote no doesn't necessarily, it may mean a no for here, but it's not a no for the rest of the districts.
And Helen, just to interrupt, this sheet, this color, which is on the table back here, this is a quick summary
Yes,
of what a yes and no vote represent.
Yes, and that's what the ballot should be based on, not what the ballot wording is now.
Counting on this exchange as into your time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you
All
got
right,
a minute.
I'm hearing you. Around the teachers, I really feel that the teachers need to be, well, should have been as part of the planning process surveyed anonymously, because I think the kids, teachers are actually leery of making statements, because they don't want to upset the administrative apple cart. And that's nothing to say about how personable people are and open about trying to hear people's perspective, but teachers have told me that they're nervous. So I've heard the other part, I am not asking, the other part, and that they don't want to say anything unless it was anonymous. They don't want to be, anyway, so I just put that out. I think teachers and parents are key constituencies to be really spending time with about these issues. And then the funding formula, the whole thing about tax relief is not really, I think it's a myth, except for these incentives, because I think the funding formula is driven by Act 60 and 68. And so even after these tax incentives, maybe you realize taxes still may go up. So I think that that's a myth. And the last thing I wanted to say is I was frustrated with this report because I really was left feeling that there wasn't a lot of talk about children or kids or students. So I did a word search and I couldn't come up with any children, but except for a mixed minority group, like they were mentioned 6 times. Then I did one on educational opportunities, and one was like 1, and another one on educational outcomes, and I'm like, no wonder I'm confused, no wonder this doesn't feel good. So I really feel like the cost-benefit analysis, which is the driving part in this report for me, doesn't really point out what improved educational opportunities there would be for hard-to-reach children. And I think this is what it ought, that's at the heart of this, or ought to be in my mind. So that's what I'm going to say.
move on to Heidi.
Thank you, I need you, I'm only gonna talk a minute because I have to leave, just 2 minutes. Another meeting.
Oh, you're always late.
I know, I have a reputation to uphold here by being late. So I was amused with the comparison of the $100,000, $50,000 mortgage, and then the $200,000 home, the $100,000 mortgage, one therefore being worth more than the other, and I'm sure you all did the math here. But if I were the person with the $50,000 mortgage, I would not want to merge with the $100,000 mortgage and then have to pay $75,000. Just wanted to throw that out. One of the other points I wanted to make is before Act 60, Huntington often had the highest tax rate in the county, and we made do for many years. We didn't spend a lot of money. This gym floor is a prime example. It's tile on concrete, and it really, excuse the term, it really sucks to play on this floor. And we don't have a state-of-the-art gym floor that other schools have. The other schools with lower tax rates that had larger tax bases. So I'd like to point that out. So I refuse to feel guilty about our lower tax rate right now. So my other question, Michael, you don't have to respond to my first two comments because I won't be here to hear it. But yes, I am. On the, what I feel is buying my vote by giving me money back on my tax bill, which, I did the math and I don't really think it's worth it, but that's my opinion. So I would not vote for this based on the money that is being offered. I have heard that because we already have a union district with the 5 to 12, that really the rate is not the full 8%, but it's 1/3 of the 8. Do you see what I'm saying? We're only merging K through 4, and because we already have this other union school district, therefore we're not going to realize the entire amount of that percentage.
That second point is not accurate.
Okay.
I went over that with Brad James and the state.
So is that in writing somewhere? Did I miss it?
No, it's how Brad James has explained it to Bob and to John Albert.
So will that be in writing somewhere so that everyone can see it and not just?
Well, the live answer is it's in the-
Okay. So we would get the full 8 cents.
Yes, that
And we're actually saying that we're gonna have, 1/3 of 8.
If I could just have a
Okay,
second.
I just wanna make
answer your
sure.
question. I got a second answer your question. It's 8 cents or a 5% cap. And it's explicitly written into Act 156. So it is in writing. And what we confirmed with Brad is he's gone through his calculations, and it is being provided to all of us on that basis. Now, if I may just briefly, I have heard the comment made that these tax incentives are, and frankly, the way it's been used is bribes. And I know that troubles many of our state legislators who have actually supported those and voted for them. And when I talked with them, they've expressed the following to me. They said, Michael, it is part of the responsibility of somebody who is in government to provide public support for good public policy. They said, secondly, what we're doing here is simply making sure that there is an opportunity for this conversation. Because what happened previously when districts tried to merge is one town would look at it and say, my taxes are going to go up by 1 cent. And that was the end of the conversation. There was no conversation about it. Just like you hear people say that things like subsidies for health care in the Affordable Care Act are a bribe. It's the same, unfortunately, the same kind of analysis. If you think this is something that's worthy of good public policy, and if you think we ought to decide it on the merits, as opposed to simply looking at our own tax bill and saying, my town is the loser, then I think you'll think about it. So I hope that answers and responds to you, and I think the state one would be great, but thank you.
Thanks.
Heidi, anytime if you want to give me a call, be delighted to chat.
So Rebecca, I think you're next.
Yeah, I just wondered if someone could respond to the concern. I guess I'm wondering if one town votes no and all the other towns vote yes, what are the consequences for that outlier town? Are there any negative impacts to that, or is everything just going to stay exactly?
There are negative impacts. The first negative impact is you do not obviously share in the incentive tax savings. The second negative impact is more subtle, but I think real and something to appreciate. The towns that would vote no are not going to be integrated into the system fully. I mean, you have representation on the union board, just as you do now at MMU. But that integration that we're hoping for, where if the kneecap science test shows that elementary students need a different method of education, and that different method involves technology, and that technology requires us to appropriate some money, you're not at the table. You're not part of that conversation. If the communities decide that they can get together and share staff in a way that saves money, you're not at the table, you're not part of that conversation. None of that can happen. Now, you would retain your local school board, and as far as I'm concerned, as an MMU board member, as somebody who's running for this new board, somebody who lives in Richmond, taxpayers, and students of this community, I have to value them as much as anybody, regardless of who votes what way. It just doesn't matter because they're all my responsibility. But I won't have the ability on that unified school board to work the same way with you. And your community won't have the same way to work with unified system. That's the
Michael, I wonder if you might spend a moment or two talking about the way in which some of the services that these supervisory union will be provided in a non-merged elementary district. The way that those services will be, the cost of those services will be assessed under a modified union as opposed to what we have now.
No, that's a great point to remind you. Right now, we do allocation. And basically, regardless of whether your particular community uses all of John Albertini's week or 1 minute of this week, you pay the same portion of the salary. Now, if we merge, of course, there will be districts who are members, districts who are not full members. Those districts who are not full members, the services that they receive from the Chittenden Supervisory Union, the pricing of which is not mandated by state or federal law. Some of those services are mandated by state and federal law, a certain price, but those can be charged on the basis of the actual cost incurred. And so if a non-member district, for example, says, gee, we'd like John down here all the time, that's a service that they'll have to pay for.
Did you say only the ones that are not mandated?
Yes, if you go through state and federal law, there are various services that have to be charged on an allocated basis to the number of students. The most prominent one that comes to mind is special ed services. And the theory behind that, of course, is that if a child with special needs moves into any community, regardless of how they're governed, we all want to share that cost. But then there's other costs that aren't. And in a different configuration, the towns who are not part of it, they may be paying a different price depending on how they use the services. Does that answer your respective
Can you give an
questions?
example of 3 things that are not allocated and 3 things that are allocated, just so we know what we're talking about?
I'm not sure if I can go to the back breaking tip.
Well, what are some things that are not allocated that we would get billed for if we weren't?
Okay. Administration time is a good example. John, do you want to step in here on this?
Business services.
Yep.
Those are the 2
Is that include budgeting that you do now?
So we pay for those things now, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We pay based
Equalized
on,
per pupil basis.
right, on the per pupil, and I mean, I'm just afraid it sounds like we're not paying for those already. So
No, I'm trying to say that. Right now, it's based on equalized pupil, so enrollment percentage.
So that, I'm sorry, I couldn't
So
remember
that,
the
that
process
formula would
exactly.
change, are you saying that that formula would change, it would no longer be based on equalized pupil, it would be based on?
Yes, so that's the point I want to make. It would no longer be based on equalized per pupil. Instead, a non-merged elementary district would be paying for those services, if there's just one, by themselves. So in that sense,
Would that be true for something
We'd be on our
like the music teacher or the Spanish teacher that we share with another town? We would also be paying for their time versus equalized pupil?
we already pay.
Now, currently, that's the way, it's a percentage of what, if you have 2 days in your budget, you're paying 40% of the person's salary. And things like, you know, benefits coordination, human resources, you know, those things are not.
Now, the assumption would be that we wouldn't use any more time than we're using now. So theoretically, it shouldn't cost us more. But I think the fear that is being put out there is that because we would be billed per service, per hour, that we might end up paying more.
okay, can I move us along here? Gail, I think you're up, and then Bill, thank you, and then Eric.
Thanks. I'm Gail Conley, and I have a minute of history. I didn't see Bob Goodwill till just now. Just let me finish up a little bit. Special ed is mandated by, more than one law. Transportation and services from students is mandated by state law. So is teacher contract negotiations is now mandated by state law. And the superintendent, on another law, the superintendent's description is that he's supposed to spend a percentage of time based on students. That's another part of the state law. Didn't talk about money, he just talked about his time. So anyway, but I wanted everyone to be aware of. I retired 4 times, 4 times. Was from Trinity East. My first administrative hire was Ken Remsen. 21 years ago, Ken came over to us for Maine and was the principal of TID. I had a chance to hire our great assistant superintendent as a math teacher. I don't know how many years ago that was, but you don't either. 15. I had a chance to hire John Alberghini as a principal at Bolton. That must have been 15 years ago also. And and Goodrow is an old timer. He was here long before I came. And I'm happy to see there, in a funny sort of way, I'm happy to see I'm on the other side of this issue. I'm strongly opposed to this here. I'd like to debate, there are about, out of 44 pages, there's only about 31 that I'd like to debate item by item, but there's never that opportunity. But I wanted you to understand, we've only been here 20 years, but Goodrow can tell us how many times have we tried to reorganize the schools in the state. I think we've done it. It comes up over the last 50 or 100 years, it comes up every 10 years, something like that. But I give Richard Kate, our former commissioner, full credit for this round of mergers. And I think he was completely wrong. And he created a myth that lives live today. It's on the Chittenanese website, the myth. The myth is K-12 school districts are more efficient. That's one myth. And the other part of that myth is K-12 school districts do a better job of educating kids. And that's not true. Now we have, I think, 9 K-12 districts in the state. Late this afternoon, I thought I would take a look at their tax rates. Underhill Center tax rate is lower than every one of those 9 except for Springfield and Winooski. No, Winooski and, where's the other one? Winooski and Milton. Both Winooski and Milton are K-12 districts, and their tax rate is lower than Underhill Center. The highest tax rate is Springfield. So I got the whole list. You know all these places: Colchester, Milton, Montpelier, South Burlington. South Burlington, there, the news, Burlington. Those are the 9, 8 or 9, and we're competitive. We're not being taxed. You can go on the website and look at the academic performance of Mount Mansfield High School. It's always first or second, and always first or second in Essex. Our educational programs are phenomenal. And I didn't, Jim, what did you say? I was a political, I don't know what you said, the superintendents do these kind of things, political or self-paper, I didn't either one of those necessarily. I believe my 11 years here, my job was only to help the 9 grade principals do their job. And when the 9 grade principals are in the school, leaders are helping the teachers, that's the job. And then to recognize the board members when you see them. That's about it.
Bill, I think you're next, and then Eric, is there a hand before Joe? Can't see who's next.
I'm Bill Fulton. I'm the community rep for Underhill ID, so I'm not on the board, but I was on the committee. Little confusion about what you can be charged for and how that's done. If there is one school that's not in, and they're going to make a budget at the district office, there's 2 budgets there. One for the school that's not in, and one for everything else. The extra time that it takes to make the budget for that school is going to be charged to the people that choose not to be in. And it's going to be like that with everything. So, of course, it's going to take more time to do this budget for all these different schools. But proportionally, that human being's time, you guys are going to be paying a larger share of it because they're doing a completely separate budget for you. Will it increase costs? Probably. I mean, we don't have, this hasn't been done yet. So I can't go out there and say, it's going to cost you $10 extra, because we don't know. But we do know when you take economies to scale, things get cheaper. The more people we put in this basket, they get more expensive the less people we put in this one. I am only going to take a little bit of time. I believe I received a letter from you. Was that you that wrote the letter to me?
Yes, I sent a letter to 6,335 folks.
That's why I'm here today, because I received a letter that was filled with factual inaccuracies. The facts are that the board has tried to answer most of the questions that you guys have had. That we have attempted, we haven't given you the answers you wanted all the time, but we answered your questions. There were things that our board couldn't do. Our committee was tasked with a certain task. If this is a good idea, give us a plan. That was all we were tasked with. We weren't tasked with coming up with alternate ideas. We weren't tasked with coming up with alternate plans. We were tasked with, is this a good idea? You guys decide, and we did. If it's a good idea, give us a plan. A lot of the misinformation has been that we didn't look at other options. Well, we weren't given the option to look at other options. We were told, look at this one option. Make a decision, is it a good idea or not? So that's what we did. So a lot of the misinformation out there, it's convoluting the issue. And the issue is, are we going to be better together or are we going to be better apart? A lot of people are arguing about, well, we should have spent more time, we should have talked to people longer about this. We already had a vote where the majority of people in our community have said, this is a good idea. Because of the way that vote was set up, we ignored the will of the majority for some people that chose not to join into that. This allows that majority to go forward. So those studies and that time with those people have been done. We're not ignoring it. It's already been done. We've already voted. This gives us the opportunity to where we're not disenfranchised. Our vote actually does matter for us.
Bill, I can ask you to make a final point.
And that's it. I'm good.
Okay, the
We're
order
not
in
my
which,
3 minutes. I'm sitting down.
the order in which I think I saw hands was Eric and Ross and Joe and Jordan and Joanne. Yes.
My name is Eric Gall. I live on the main road towards Saxville, and I teach at the high school. So I wear a number of different hats. I'm also the parent of 3 young children. As of next year, I'll have 3 daughters, all here at First Peters. And I've been following this issue from the first vote, prior to that and along the way, and certainly feel like I have a reasonable view on the perspective of my community members anyway. And I know there's concerns about history going way back before my time. There are concerns around process and the way things were addressed. And I think you spoke very eloquently. Thank you, Allison. Some of the benefits for me are even, in many ways, a little dubious. I don't find those convincing. But there's one thing that I trust fully in working in Chickadees for a decade and a half, close to at this point in time, and working, being in contact with teachers in all of the schools is that from the board down to every support staff member, schools at Chickadees will do things well. And what that means is that this merger goes forward in part or in whole, it will be done well, whether we like it or not. I have faith in the current board members that they're going to make the best of it despite any challenges that come along. And that's where my fear comes in. I fear the outlier status. And maybe I have kind of resigned myself to the belief that the writing's on the wall for the rest of the district. But that impact, in my mind, is going to be on my kids. And our increased liability, mandatory preschool. I haven't heard anything about that. Preschool's getting mandated for 3-year-olds and up next year, folks. How are we going to pay for that? And what impact is that going to have on the services in our school for my kids? Because we're determined to maintain local control and outlier status. I don't believe that all of the reasons for this merger are a good one, but I am 99% going to vote for it for that reason and that reason alone. Because I'm selfish and I want my kids to be as prepared as kids in Underhill, in Jericho, in Richmond when they move through this community, because I'm not going anywhere. Why would we want to risk not being a part of a great thing by all measures, district-wide?
I coach soccer up there. I've seen him teach kids how to pass the ball. I don't think you're that selfish. Ross?
Yeah, Ross Ogilvy. I have a few points I want to make and ask one question. First off, my comment is we do have an excellent school system. I put 3 kids through the system, and my last is in high school at this point. Outstanding system, prepares the kids very, very well. And that system, part of that system, and I think a significant part of it, is the existing elementary school boards. So I'd like to make elaborate on some of the points that were made over here about the school boards. Those school boards manage a lot of problems, a huge number of problems. And I would venture a guess that very few of them are inefficiencies in the fact that things are not aligned. And I'm going to need to see a lot of data that says what the problems that they deal with are not ones that have to do with the efficiency of being part of a unified system. But apparently, the consolidation board thinks that what those people do and what the problems that they do are not valuable, or they're very inefficient. And so from that standpoint, I'd really like to see how those issues and problems are dealt with from a volunteer group with no money. And I'd like to see a line item in the new budget that states the people that you're going to hire that deal with the problems that are not going to be dealt with when these school board members are let go.
Just briefly, I'm doing a quick arithmetic here. Let me get this wrong to know the past. Out of the 18 people who were members and alternates, 9 of them are current or former elementary school board members. It's not as if that perspective wasn't part of the conversation. And I agree with you. You say we do have good schools, but I think that's a snapshot. I think you have to look forward and say, will our small elementary schools be able to stay good? Now, I don't want to take all the time now, but I would encourage you before you leave to seek out Kevin. Kevin, would you stand up? Okay. He's the chair of the Underhill IB board, and ask him whether in the absence of a merger, he can sustain excellence for the students in his school. Andrew, could you raise your hand? Ask you to ask Andrew, who's the chair of the Bolton School. Ask him whether in the absence of a merger, he can sustain excellence. And somebody might say, well, that's not our problem. I think it is our problem. I really do think we're a community, and if something goes wrong in any of our towns, we're all responsible for it. But even if you don't share that belief, their children arrive on our desks at grade 5.
Joe.
Thanks, Joe Segali. This is really the first time I've kind of dived into a school issue. We don't have kids, but certainly a significant part of our property taxes go to the school, and I care about it. And I appreciate the fact that I have an opportunity to vote on this. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think there's been enough discussion on this. I think what's great about starting with this vote is that there's all sorts of information that was put out there, following the report, and it helped me think about it even more. And what I'm taking away from this is, I see it as an opportunity. I see it as a way to increase accountability, and I also see it as a way to maintain or provide some sort of sustainability in the future going forward. And I think the risk is, and maybe what there's a little bit of fear about, is the loss of local control, some loss of local control, because we don't have complete local control of the situation in the first place. And maybe sort of drill down even deeper and say, well, what does that really mean to me as a voter? Am I really going to have any less control in this situation? And I think the answer to me is no, I'm not. I mean, I'm going to be able to vote on the budget. I'm going to be able to approach school board members if I feel like it. And really the way that individuals make a difference is by showing up at meetings like this, even when I don't know completely what I'm talking about, and kind of sharing information and talking about it. But one of the questions I have is really related to the sustainability question, and kind of alluded to earlier here, is if we go it alone, what's the real risk? At some point, what's going to happen to the demographics in our town? Are we going to have less kids? Are we going to be left holding the ball and having to pay for the things that we need, all by ourselves? So what's the exposure, not just in the next few years, but 15 years from now, 20 years from now, if there's some sort of not just demographics, but some other interruption that could happen. Are we going to be resilient enough as a small community of, however many people, 2,000 people, to really absorb whatever shock happens? And are we going to be in the same boat that I understand that Bolton is in what they're facing right now? And so I'm looking to the future and thinking about that. And that's really, why I'm going towards yes. But that's my question. If anybody can answer that, it's kind of a tough what if in the future.
So can you narrow your question? I'm sorry.
The question is, what happens if Huntington doesn't join the union? And I guess we have a year. We can, next year we could vote on this. But after that, we're at the mercy of the rest of the communities that allow us to join the union. Are we on our own completely to deal with whatever challenges might come down the road at us?
If any town, Huntington or any of them, I don't want to just personalize this because I think it matters to all our towns. If any town doesn't join, there's 1 year where you can, where simply by the community voting, they can come in. They won't get the tax incentives for that year, and they'll be behind, as I mentioned before, but they have a year's grace period. After that year, though, it requires an affirmative vote by both the town that has decided not to be part and by the other school district. Now, if you couldn't obtain that majority vote from the other town because folks said, gee, we just don't want you to join at that point, your elementary school would be on its own. And nobody has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now, but the one thing we do know in Vermont is that right now the smaller schools are are increasingly becoming stressed. And there isn't a demographic projection out there that can tell you what Huntington's population is going to be 3 or 5 years from now. Those things are too variable. But we do know as student populations decline, that stress builds in. So I would say I don't know what's going to happen to you. I do know it's a risky place to be.
Let me make one point. And that's it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sally, but I think Huntington is gonna have 7 less students. They have 7 less students this year than they had last year. And that, because of the size of the school, that really is gonna influence your equalized pupils, because it's a 2-year average. And that will influence your tax rate. When you gain an economy of scale, there's much less volatility up and down in the small school tax rate.
Can I also just add on to that quickly? I just learned this evening during our board meeting that Fulton is penalized $28,000. $28,000 because of this equalized per pupil below a certain level, they get penalized $28,000. That if they join the larger district, that $28,000 comes to the larger district. It's not wasted and to a tax that goes to the state. That's an example of one of the ways that we'll
Allison, I see your hand. We'll get you in that order, okay? So Jordan, I think you're next.
Jordan Davies. I was on the school board in Randolph County as opposed to school in South Hill for 5 or 6 years, chair for 2 or 3 years. And in my experience, well, a lot of the was a big impetus toward the merger, somewhat different in the sense that one or two smaller schools were forced to close after students from that school's adjacent school. The problem in Randolph County is that it's very large, so bus times would be quite exceptional. And there was another reason too, it was about getting cost per pupil. One school that had a plus enrollment wanted to send their kids to our school, which had a smaller population of students in Wisconsin, from high 15 years ago, 200, 220 to the low level students today, 120. But in my experience, as both chair and school board member, the primary goal, as I understood it, was to establish a school budget. That was really the overriding factor. As far as being a chair, hiring principals or hiring a superintendent, we would, again, which you both know, or you all know, we would go to a meeting and hire that person based on their profile and their CV. So, but I want to quote something, Mr. Albini, from your note here, if you don't mind. You say CESU schools and communities are working collaboratively to effectively prepare students for college and successful careers. This mission has influenced and is defining our curricula, programs, and methods and professional development. Now, in my experience, the administration, the principals, the superintendents, the secretary of education, the education department, those are the primary drivers of the curriculum. And the school boards had very little say in what that was. They had to obey the law and to follow the rules that were set forth in education. What courses that were being offered, they could comment on those courses, but they could change them. So I think what you say in your letter is perfectly true. It's really the Board of Education that sets forth curriculum. Now, as far as things like teacher hiring and number of students per classroom, in our case it was about 15. That was great, but I think that our school boards, the school boards in Randolph County did a great job. They were all responsible and to their various communities, and it worked well. And as far as things like the kneecap scores, everybody was pretty much on an even field, even basis. The scores were very high, like I said, they were highest in the state, they were pretty high. But my point really is the merger thing, I'm kind of on the fence about it. I can see the good parts of it and see the bad parts. I see nothing wrong with individual school boards adhering to the policy of good education as mandated by the state. I see nothing wrong with that. On the other hand, perhaps as some have stated, that it might be better to have one unified system. I'm not sure at this point. But in my experience, we did a good job, and I'm proud of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Who's next? Joanne?
I have three people I'd like to address, or any of you should answer, or you don't have to even make any comments. But first, Bill. Speak up. Bill, you claim that you answered most of the questions of anybody that came to the committee meetings. No. I never heard anybody answer any question of any visitor that came. We had 10 minutes at the beginning of every committee meeting to hear from the public. About half of those meetings, I was the only one there. And a couple of meetings, there were maybe 2 or 3 people. And there was only another handful, a small handful of 4 or 5, and they kind of said their thing and went. But nobody's commenting. You could comment, you could ask questions, but then when that 10 minutes was up, the committee took on their role for the night, and not until way into the number of meetings that there was any discussion even between committee members. So these community open forums are the first time you have to ask questions. Here's some answers, here's some dialogue. Dialogue and discussion involves 2 people unless you look in the mirror and talk to yourself. You don't get any information like that. And some of the comments and the jibes to different things, and I won't get into that, but boy, it's a can of worms for sure, that came up from members, you included, were just disgraceful as to some of the points that were finally discussed between the companies. I can talk to you personally about that. Okay. Mr. Marks? Did you understand?
And Michael was fine, by the way.
Yeah, Michael's fine. Thank you, and I like you calling me. Anyway, I went to 14 out of the 16 meetings. I didn't go to any of the organizational meetings. I wasn't on the committee, you know, the ones where you set up, we're gonna do this, we're gonna meet at this time, do all that kind of setting up for your committees, okay? So, do you not remember Mr. Leopold, your lawyer, said that we are under an umbrella that covers us, the Chimneys Supervisory Union that was established years and years and years ago. All of the schools in that, underneath that union, Mount Mansfield Unified District, is that what it's called? Mount Mansfield? Yeah. Anyway, MMU, you know. And that covers all our kids in all the towns. We are all not trying to get out of that. We were doing an excellent job. And I heard from Assistant Superintendent, when I suggested that we have curriculum and study committees, send a couple teachers from each of these schools, to the elementary schools, to go there and talk about what's the level of training in 4th grade or 3rd grade in math and science and all these things, so they could unify their program and have equality. And she said they've had that ongoing. I know that Essex has that. They have 5 elementary schools going into the high school, and they have teachers they send from each of those schools to meet together a couple times a month, and they have substitutes hired to take over their place in the classroom, and they make sure that 4th grade is covering all the important things, because they want the 5th grade. Well, they don't go to just 4th grade like we do, and the MMU system starts from 5th grade on. But they make sure that every one of those elementary schools knows the type of things that are covered in math and science and social studies. And already, all schools, all teachers have things that they're supposed to cover during that year. I'm a retired teacher. I've taught many, many levels at many, many districts,
Joanne, I want to jump in real quick. You've been a great attender of many meetings, so I'd like to grant you more time. But I do want to encourage you to come to an end of your remarks. It's been about 1.5 minutes here.
Teachers know what's required for each level of school. And they're supposed to get this much math in, these topics in for math, and these for science, and these for social studies. So they're already doing that. Good teachers do that. And there's not a lot of difference between what they're doing in each of our elementary schools. And I'll switch to another subject. You said that in your front porch forum, not going to the front porch forum anymore. Had a real problem with it. A no vote exposes Huntington to taxpayers to a great risk. We could be on our own for the shared services. Well, the state law mandates that the CESU services are for all districts on an equitable basis. No elementary district in the entire state of Vermont can be on its own. It's in the law. CESU is that umbrella that's over all of us. All these independent elementary schools are under that. We share central services. And now you tell me if Huntington should have to vote out, we've got to pay our superintendent by the hourly wage for what he does. Right now, every school is required to make their own budget. Those budgets have to go together and be combined into one big budget. It's the same number. 9 schools make up a budget. They all go in there. You can't be accountable. You can't be accountable for what's a line item that costs $20,000. Well, where did that go? Without showing, it's actually better as it is, because you can be accountable for each school has to be accountable for the money that they spent. And then it all goes into one budget, and you can make another budget over that. But it is not one budget. We all have to make those budgets. Teachers, no matter where they are, have certain standards, certain things that have to be in the curriculum at each level. And with the coordinating study committee, they're getting together between all our little elementary schools. They're getting together and they're working together to make equalize their opportunities in each school.
Joanne, I want to do my best to be respectful here.
Okay.
I'm in an unfortunate position of asking you the final remark, and then I'm going to move on to another speaker.
Okay, well, it's just not true that you're going to be lost and not be out of the central services. It's not true. It can't be. Thank you.
Okay. I think our next speaker is Andrew, and then Allison. Did I see your name?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Andrew Pond. I chair the Bolton School Board, as you heard earlier. I want to share with you my perspective on the loss of school board members and what that really means. It's entirely true that we're talking about going from 45 school board members to 15. In my 7 years on the Bolton board, I've also served on the executive committee, the policy committee. I've gone to plenty of finance committee meetings for MMU. A lot of the meetings function quite efficiently, but we do spend a lot of time coordinating between all of the 8 boards and however many committees that there are. It's certainly good work, and that work has to be done now because of the way we're set up. But it doesn't feel as though we're helping students. It doesn't feel as though we're helping really benefit the school system when we're spending a lot of time coordinating. The other thing I want to share is, at least our experience on the Bolton School Board, is that we don't spend a lot of time dealing with individual issues. For the most part, teachers can deal with them, the principal deals with them, or the superintendent. The time that we spend, we also don't feel as though we have a huge amount of control, in the sense that between the federal and state requirements and our enrollment, it doesn't feel as though we're truly making a whole lot of meaningful decisions that affect just the Smiley School. I think that the work that gets done is often in other committees making policy. Certainly the budget affects us, but I think a lot of the other work gets done in other committees. So I have no concern about having 15 board members. who would be able to manage the school. And I don't think it will affect students because what really matters to the school is not how many people can say they're a school board member. It doesn't matter how many people are sitting in that boardroom giving direction to the superintendent. The real important people are the folks that show up and read to kindergartners. They're the ones, my next door neighbor runs a ski program for the students in Bolton. Those are the sort of people that really help the students, and they're going to continue, and they don't need to have the school board label on after their. Thank you.
Thanks. Now,
I'm just gonna come out front because I'm sitting in the back and everybody will have to talk about
Generator.
Okay. Michael, I can't let you get away with that bit about the tax bribes, in the legislature wanting to support kids' public policy. I confess, I am the author of that word bribes, and I will argue that until the day I die, because for those of us who believe that this is not good public policy, paying someone to vote for something that we think is a bad idea does seem like a bribe. So that's the interpretation of that. And I'm glad you went and mentioned it to the legislator because they need to hear that. I want to give you my perspective about good public policy. We're here for the children, and I guess maybe I should say that I am a member of Mount Mansfield Union School Board. I wasn't present when they voted to approve the merger that night. I have something else I have to do, but I would have voted against it, but it wouldn't have made any difference. But I have been an educator for over 40 years. I taught for 8 years at this school, even though I'm a resident of Richmond. I still feel a part of this community too. And I think one of the most important facts that has come out so far tonight was made by Helen. How many times was the word education or children mentioned in this merger report? We are here for the children. We're here for education. I'm not hearing, oh, I love this merger. I think it's great. I'm hearing, you know, I don't want to be hanging out there alone, so I guess I'll vote for it. And I'm sorry, but I just think that that's not doing the best thing. I'm hearing fear-mongering. People who don't want to be hanging out there alone. Oh, we may not be able to afford this anymore. Nobody has said, why don't we go to the legislature and demand that they write a law that creates better public policy? And I think that's what we need to do. We don't need to jump into this merger that we have so many questions about because we're scared. We need to be scared enough to say, legislature, you need to do a better job. We need a structure that's better. Now, one of my master's degrees is in planning. Even though I'm a musician, I'm also a planner. For the planners who make structures. We have a structure being proposed that's very divisive. We're being pressured to work together and come together for something that divides us. Everybody's mad at everybody else. We said, oh, we don't agree with this and we don't agree with that. We need a structure that most people can agree with most parts of without so much hassle. We need to be able to keep our school boards. We need to be able to plan a little more efficiently, I guess. And we need the imagination of looking at the future. All we have to do is look at the recent past in a whole bunch of states to see what redistricting has done to destroy public education. And I would suggest that all of you read a book by Diane Ravitch, who's a rather well-known education historian who came to Vermont, and she's written this book called Reign of Error, The Hoax of Privatization and the Danger to America's Public Schools. Read about what mergers have really done. Thank you.
I may just briefly. Allison, I didn't want to speak to your backs.
I'm sorry.
I don't know, I just didn't want to.
Yes, okay.
We're just going to have to agree to disagree about what is really the kind of language we should use in assessing what our state legislators have done. I think it's better to be respectful to them and to say, look, I disagree with your policy, or to say, I approve of your policy. And we really should understand that these folks are our neighbors. And they have said in good faith, they think this is a good thing for the public at large. The second point, I've heard this twice, maybe 3 times, that our report doesn't address education. I encourage you all to read. What really motivated this whole effort was a sense that what we have now doesn't work. Doesn't work as well as it should. And Helen, I see you laughing, but if you dare me read that document
80 times.
If I may, all of us can pick out words for word searches. But I'd ask you, even if all you read are the first 3 pages of the document, the majority of just read that. And I will be surprised if you don't come to the conclusion that we were focusing on students. But I'll leave it to your judgment.
Okay, just a quick time check here. We have 10 minutes. We have one recognized speaker. Let's use show of hands of people who haven't spoken who'd like to participate. Duncan, I see your hand. Andrea, why don't we start there and see how much time we have left within those 3 speakers. Yep.
I'm Anna Carter, and I actually teach in that classroom right over there. And I just want to start off by saying I came here and I wasn't going to speak. I'm just going to listen and hear what everyone had to say. And I'm constantly being asked, what is your thoughts on the merger by parents, the other thing I didn't say is I have twins that are in 2nd grade in that classroom over there. So I live on in Huntington, Main Road. So I live in the town, I have children in this town, and I teach in this school. And when I heard about the merger, and I've only been teaching in this school for 4 years. When I heard about the merger, there was a lot of things that came to mind that was more about opportunities. And I just had a lot of conferences with parents. And it was my lane conference day, and I had 6 conferences. And I talked to every parent about their child, and I spoke about academics and about social and emotional. And every child, I was able to address that child and how you could deal with everything every challenge that child had. And a lot of the resources were in the district. It wasn't in our school. And we have an amazing school. We have tons of things. We have an art therapist in the school. I don't even know if you know that. We have some great things in the school, but we also have great resources in the whole district. And I feel like without any problem, I can just call up another school. I'm constantly talking to teachers from other schools, and I can use those resources. And I like the opportunity, and I like the idea that I'll have the opportunity to be able to use those resources more freely, and we'll be able to share them. Because, we constantly are using them, but to have that to flow more. So that's all I can say with that.
Duncan, you want to jump in?
Sure, Duncan here. Hear a lot about structure and policy. Well, the Brigham decision, I think, was the best thing in 100 years for education for our kids. That truly equalized education, where it was a huge step in the right direction anyway. It's certainly not equalized. We can see examples of that in our state. And yes, legislatures are our neighbors, our friends, and part of our community. Vermont's a small enough state that I think we can say Vermont is our community. Now, I don't have a great affiliation with Bolton or Underhill, except through our school system. And they are fantastic communities. They have a lot to offer. They're good towns. The state, having been put in a situation to jump in and help finance the education of all of our community's children, have done a fair job, but not a good job. And I think that's the reason Bolton is suffering. I think that's the reason Underhill ID is suffering. I think we have to somehow figure out on a larger field how to equalize education, how to not penalize our community members. Because kids in their town, the population is dwindling, and therefore the cost per pupil is rising. So I think we need to look at a bigger picture than just Chittenden and East. And I think this merger plan on the table right now is not a good plan, because I think what needs to be addressed is the bigger picture. But I do have a simple technical question about the plan as it's been presented. Well, Michael, you or John? John hasn't really contributed a whole lot here tonight.
Hey, John, I'm happy to have you answer.
Well, the question is, with the cost benefit analysis, some elementary schools offer more technical opportunities, have kind of leaned towards providing more computer education and devices. And other schools have leaned a little bit more towards other enrichment activities, whether it's art, language, but each of the different districts has different opportunities for their kids. And that's partly because of what the teachers have requested, what the parents have requested, what the school board has requested. And those communities have gone in those directions for those additional enrichments for the kids. I've heard in the meetings that we're not going to level down with a merger. We're going to be leveling up. One community, I think, doesn't yet offer kindergarten. And I don't understand what the funding is, pre-K. And I don't understand what the funding mechanisms are for that community. But I guess, simply, how do you offer the same enrichment activities in all of the schools? Or will you be taking away some of the enrichment activities from some of the schools?
John, I don't know if you want to take a crack at that.
Well, I think that's a policy decision by the superintendent.
If you'd like John to answer, I'm happy to have him answer.
I defer. No
offense, please. I have my own viewpoint, but it's great to hear from John.
So I won't try to predict what a new board would fund and what they won't fund. But what I do know is that I can talk about my experience at MMU. And I can honestly say that the programs at Camel's Hump and Browns River are accurate. And the services and the resources around, that support our technology plan are consistent. And in our elementary districts, they're not. And part of the reason for that is because of the last that boards have been faced with some very difficult decisions on whether they cut art, music, only offer 30 minutes of PE once or twice a week, while other schools have 45 minutes, or fix the boiler. So it's hard for me to predict what a board might do, but what I can say is we've been able to accomplish it at MMU. And I'm building off that model and using my experience within that district to say that we would prioritize, we would make recommendations, and over time, there would be equity.
So I guess what you're saying is either the budget will go up, or some of the elementary schools will lose some of the programs.
No, I'm not saying that, because when you get into I've had the good fortune of working with a big budget, it's $27 million. And there's a lot of movement and ebb and flow in that size budget. So there's times when you have a debt that has matured and terminated, and you can make some decisions on, look, we have this technology plan, we're moving to have a one-to-one initiative for our 3rd and 4th graders, we're going to invest in these dollars without raising the tax rate. That's the economy of scale that you get in a larger budget. And I think that we can use that and apply that across the SU to, over time, have equity across the whole system, and I think that will benefit students.
It's a matter of setting priorities. Your ability to do that, though, is so different when you're operating with a larger pool of money. And that to me is where we're going to be able to address this.
So Andrea, you're our last speaker from the audience. And then I'd like to give Michael a chance to wrap up and share some final thoughts. And then we'll all go home. Is that something you'd like to do next?
Well, I'd like to ask people if they want to hear
Yes. After that, I would like to have Michael get everyone whose remarks concluded. So we'll go Andrea and then Meg and Michael.
Okay. For those that don't know me, I was a school board member at Brewster Pierce for 10 years. In financially better times and with higher school population. I always felt that my job as a school board member was to walk the line. You have quality of education and you have taxpayers, and you walk the line.
Yes.
And you provide the best you can within your community's ability to pay. Well, this community is the second poorest community in the district. The talk at the general store down at Beaudry's is that people are thinking of voting for this because it's going to save them money and their taxes are going to go down. And for this particular community, that is false in the immediate future. We will be assuming a portion of $6 million bonds district-wide at the elementary level. And when Michael talks about equalizing educational opportunity, it is going to cost more money. And like I said, you always walk the line. You try to balance the two. This district had foreign language 15 years before any other elementary school district. This district chose not to go heavy into technology because we had whole discussions, and it might change now, but we had whole discussions on how important the teacher was to the child. And we consciously said we did not want technology in the K-2 level, minimal technology. Things have changed. Now, I know Richmond has voted for laptops for fourth graders, and Jericho, I believe, also has that at this point. And I doubt we have that in this community.
We do.
Okay, all right. At least at the mobile, everybody moves around on carts. So I guess what concerns me about the merger, I've listened, and there is going to be an umbrella organization. If you vote no, you are not voted off the island. The lawyer was brought in May, and he said supervisory responsibilities cannot be escaped by the modified union. And so, as was mentioned here, we're still going to get special ed, we're still going to get transportation, we're still going to get a lot of things we have. The man from Underhill mentioned that it's going to cost, that was built into the document. There were talks originally before the lawyer came in about how a district that voted no would not be allowed to rejoin for 10 years and all this kind of stuff. And then the lawyer came in and said, voting no does not mean school choice. You are part of this still. You cannot send your kids over to Heinsberg. You cannot send your kids, you're still part of the group. So I just want people to understand that you aren't voted off the island, that you are assuming larger financial responsibilities. Oh, sorry. Because a lot of times the bond issues, that's kind of, you have to go to the CESU website to find that page. It wasn't built in here. A lot of the cost savings that are listed there for our tax purposes, the money saved on not having an Underhill ID treasurer, that's not going to change our taxes. A lot of those things do not change our taxes. So if you're voting for this for monetary reasons, you better pull out a calculator. That's it. I overspent like 3 minutes.
Thanks. Why don't you take a few minutes if you want to share your thoughts? But let's keep it in the time frame. Just a few minutes, please.
As most of you who are here know, I went to every single merger meeting. As a committee member, I have a dubious distinction of having become a minority. I think Michael will agree that I attempted to be respectful, and part of who I am is to dig down deep below the surface and see what the questions are that we should be asking. Probably the primary reason I wrote the minority report was because I felt like we had not asked the right questions or looked at data for tipping fees. I would not begin to advise you how to vote. I think that there are many, many good reasons to consider unifying. In my heart of hearts, I wish that we could vote it down and do a better job and come up with a better set of articles that would address how we are represented and consider such things as particularly how the elementary schools are represented. One of my biggest concerns is the fact that we will have 9 buildings instead of 3 being managed by the same number of board members, and that instead of the board seeing their 1 or 2 principals every month, the board members will not have the same amount of face-to-face with the principals. These things can be dealt with school councils. However, school councils will not have votes because that has not been written into the articles. The articles are like a constitution that sets up our governance, and the governance is going to be a 15-member board. But I would encourage folks to read the minority report, which is part of the report, to understand some of the issues that perhaps haven't been covered. And I really appreciate that you folks are here tonight and care enough to be here. When all is said and done, I think we all see ourselves as part of the same community, even if we have a different opinion on this. And I think we all want the best for our kids. And I hope that no matter how we feel after the vote takes place, that we will take our fervor for how we care about the kids and find a way to continue to make our schools a better place. Because after all, that's why we're here. So again, I want to say that even though I have written a minority report and I care very much about the concerns that I have, we are ultimately one community, and let's stay that way.
Really glad you jumped in and wanted to speak. Thank you. It was a great set of sentiments there. Michael, do you want to wrap up here?
I know there's nuts and bolts of service we have here. How could anyone say something better to a meeting like this than they just Thank you.
Great, well, thanks everyone for coming. And if you want to attend another version meeting, the 16th,
Or tomorrow in Richmond.
Or